Okay, so I'm going to use this video to talk about counter gangs and how it affects the men's rights movement and the pro-mil collective. Okay, so this video is going to be useful structuring my arguments. So I'm just going to reply to this and point how it's relevant to men's rights, right?
Hello everyone. So recently I've been reading the works of a left-wing writer called Caleb Maupin, and the book I want to talk about today is called What is a Counter Gang? What fascinated me...
So I'm going to talk about counter gangs and I'm going to talk about people who behave like they're in a counter gang. You can even call them like decentralized counter gangs, right? It's actually not coordinated by the state, but the results of their actions are the same, right?
About this is that he, Maupin, from the left, came to a lot of the same conclusions about the likes of BLM and Antifa that I had come up with 5 years ago. Obviously, I was using the lens of elite theory. He was getting there through Marxism. But essentially, what is a counter gang? Well, I argued back in the day that BLM and Antifa were counter-revolutionary forces that were state-backed, working for some power or other.
So he misses the obvious, right? Like most men do. The commonality that Antifa and Black Lives Matter have is they're both intersectional feminists captured as well. They're both... Black Lives Matter is definitely intersectional feminist. It's black women feminism, basically. Making police brutality against black men about women, right? There was that black lesbian woman taking donations on behalf of Black Lives Matter and she bought herself an expensive house or did some other sorts of fraud with it, right? But police brutality is a real issue, and the pushback against it is a real mess because it's divided along racial grounds in America especially, and it's captured by feminists, right? When this issue is a male issue, police brutality is a male issue. Like the lesbian feminists of Black Lives Matter are the sort of women who will call the police on their spouses, right? And it's not a contradiction to calling them lesbian feminists and saying male spouses, because most feminine lesbians are performative political lesbians just to deselect men out of spite, right? Okay, so countless millions of black men have had their lives destroyed by domestic violence policing and the family court being in favour of black single mothers, right? That's the biggest issue that black men face, and all men face, right? But Black Lives Matter won't talk about this because they're feminists. So child support enforcement is slavery and drives many men, including black men, to an early death, an early grave from the stress. Or a lot of not a lot, but sometimes child support slaves will lash out and go on a rampage and do suicide by cop, for example, because they're just driven to it by the stress. Yeah, Black Lives Matter won't talk about this. Yeah, because Black Lives Matter is feminist.
Probably the Democrat Party. He comes to exactly the same conclusions and he gives evidence for it. But I'm much more interested in the actual notion of counter gang, what it does for the system, how it works.
So counter gangs, from what I understand, is just funded groups that invade real countercultural spaces and undermines them, right? So it gives voices to extremists and idiots and people who are emotional, right? Like intersectional feminists, right? Like politically correct people obsessed with racism, for example, right? And it undermines these movements and destroys them from within, right? So like, the left has actually been destroyed by feminism and anti-white racists as well, which is part of intersectional feminism, right? So anti-white racism is a intersectional feminist tactic to divide the different groups of men, the ethnic groups of men. So it's going, oh look, it's all white men to blame. They're your oppressor, and it sets black men and other minority men against white men, and it causes them to infight, right? And it also eggs on and inflames the small minority of white racists as well, and it causes a infighting. It works out for the feminists as well.
And in this video, I want to delve into this more and read a little bit from Marx on this very question. First of all, though, I have a sale going on.
Let's skip this shit. Oh, there's another fucking advert. Right, come on up.
Remember her princess
Let's skip
era?
this.
Well, with Vinted's new categories, you can now sell all
actually constitutes them, how they are different from a genuine revolutionary vanguard, how they are different.
So these counter gangs are very emotional. They don't talk about things on a systematic level, or when they do it in a very false, superficial way. They'll talk about patriarchy or white supremacy in a very vague and nebulous way that doesn't mean anything. They actually won't talk about structural issues for real, right? Okay, like feminism and female social dominance is a real structural issue. It's the biggest problem plaguing the black community, single motherhood. But they won't talk about these things, yeah?
From, you know, so a counter gang, just to explain the basic premise, is when some power faction, when some elite group within society hires street thugs or promotes or gives backing to or gets the authorities to turn a blind eye to the activities of a set of street thugs who are drawn typically from what Marx calls the lumpen proletariat.
So this is going to show you what a reactionary Marx is and what a tradcon Marx is. And Marx was a lumpen proletariat who's sponging off other people, right? So by his own standards.
And the reason they are called counter gangs as opposed to, just simply gangs or, revolutionary forces or protest groups, is because they are actually working in the service of some power or other, usually for, the actual system itself or for maintenance of the status quo or the interest.
So a lot of these if you spot the pattern, the commonality of these like counter gangs, they're all feminists, right? Okay, for the most part, they're all feminists. They're all intersectional feminists. Like, not every single case of them are, but most of them are. Yeah. So feminism controls the system. Feminism is the most influential, powerful political movement to ever exist. Feminism is not a plot by the elites. The elites pander to women and pander to feminism.
Interest of the ruling class. And Marx himself actually came up with this idea when the actual term, and this is actually some really interesting stuff. We were talking about it on the recent Adam Curtis review yesterday when we were talking about Can't Get You Out of My Head, and Kenya and the Mau Mau were coming up. And so
So the British just hung the Mau Mau. I think it's like the most judicial killings in British history. I think thousands were hung. Was it like 20,000 or something like that? I'll have to look it up again. I read a book on it years ago when I used to read the Mau Mau Rebellion.
The phrase counter gang comes from this guy whose name was Kitson, who was working for the British intelligence services. These days we call it MI6, or the equivalent of back then, in Kenya, and he, against the Mau Mau, organised all sorts of counter gangs to cause trouble, to plant false flags, to frame them for things they didn't do, to sow mistrust, to generally divide and conquer the population of Kenya.
Okay, so I want to talk about the counter gangs in the men's rights movement, and I don't know if they're state backed or not. They probably might be some elements of it being state backed, but I don't. But it's probably a good chance that none of them are state backed, because the men's rights movement is probably not that important. They're probably monitoring the men's rights movement, right? But I don't think they need to take action against it because it's not really a threat. Men are just so disorganised. So you have MR, like for example, left-wing male advocates recently had a comment removed, arguing against a feminist and calling out someone's frame of feminist history being false, right? And I got the comment removed for being anti-egalitarian, which it's just concern trolling at this point, right? So they've got these weird strict. So they're allowing a feminist to post pontificating false feminist revisionist history, but I get called anti-egalitarian for calling it nonsense. This person was claiming that women used to be sold as sex objects, and I said that's just nonsense. It almost never ever happens. Yeah, the only time women were ever sold was when there were slaves alongside men, when slavery was legal, right? So I got the comment removed, and I could talk about. That's just the most recent one. I could countless examples of dysfunctional, weird, wacky MRAs. They'll let feminists into the spaces. They'll let tradcon weirdos into the spaces. But when it's on trying to be analytical, rational, ethically consistent, like the Pro-Male Collective, like us, calling out feminist lies, then we get censored and then we get banned. Yeah? So they're acting as counter gangs, right? Counter pro-male revolutionaries, if you will. Yeah? And it causes infighting, it causes chaos, it causes split, and it dispirits rational, analytical men because they hit a fucking brick wall eventually within these spaces. And I think it's decentralised, I don't think it's planned and coordinated, except I do think a lot of feminists secretly capture these groups, right? So that, for example, the Fuck Collective Shout group on Reddit is feminist captured. If you actually criticise feminism and say that Collective Shout is feminist, you'll get banned. I got banned for saying that. Okay, so yeah, so it doesn't matter if it's state backed or not. The pattern of behaviour leads to the same outcome, right? But these dishonest, hostile actors, it leads to splits, damaged morale, and lack of cohesion. Men need cohesion in their own group interest, and these concerned troll groups in the MRM, men's rights movement, are stifling this.
In order to prevent this genuine rebellion. Here's a picture of him. He's Frank Kitson, and he wrote a book in 1960, I think it was, or maybe around that time, called Gangs and Counter-Gangs, which is where Morpin has got this phrase.
I'm going to have to look up that book, Counter-Gangs by Morphin.
But the same basic idea can be found in the work of Sorel, who is also covered in James Burnham's The Machiavellians. There's a whole chapter on Sorel, reflections on violence. And obviously, if you think about it, the fascists, that is Mussolini, used the black shirts. They were a counter-gang against the communists of that time. In Germany, of course, there were the brown shirts who were, according to Morpin, were another counter-gang. And here is Marx talking about the original.
So the Nazis were very successful because their gangs were based on male-on-male hostility. It appeals to a base instinct. Like building up something for men positively doesn't appeal to nasty-minded, sadistic men. So it's very hard to attract certain types of men to our cause, which we don't want anyway, but yeah.
No, counter-gang, according to him. Although you could argue there were previous ones like Caesar's Legion that was loyal to him. You could argue was a counter-gang.
I wouldn't argue that. He just seized an army to rebel against the Roman Senate. He wasn't a counter-gang. There wasn't a counter-revolutionary force he was fighting against, right? An example of counter-gangs. There's better examples of counter-gangs in Roman history, right? But we can't prove they're counter-gangs. They're just like lots of little actors and rebels and troublemakers in the city of Rome, which I can't quite remember right now. So, but yeah, there's better examples of counter-gangs than that. I wouldn't call Caesar's Legion a counter-gang.
But I really thought this passage from Marx on Bonaparte's counter-gang
was talking about Napoleon III.
Pretty interesting, and I want to read it in full. So the section I want to read here, from right at the start of the book, is called The Society of December the 10th. And this kind of gives some insight into how Bonaparte, Napoleon that is, was able to take control of the French Revolution and to stop it being genuinely revolutionary as the original kind of Rousseauians would have seen, to turn it into a vehicle for his own power, and as per Bertrand de Juvenel's book on power, a more efficient mechanism for centralization than the old Bourbon regime, which, according to Juvenel, is the true meaning of the French Revolution. So, but anyway.
So there's going to be some significant differences between this and many counter-revolutionary groups of the modern era, and I'll point out the differences, right?
Yeah, but for Marx and for the Marxists, their view is that the French Revolution was kind of it wasn't truly revolutionary because it simply replaced the aristocracy with the bourgeoisie, and it was a means of the bourgeoisie taking power and setting up a capitalist order, as opposed to something more communistic, something more genuinely revolutionary. So anyway.
So it was a bourgeoisie capitalist revolution then. It was still a revolution.
Where should I start reading this? Okay. Marx
It was still one power faction overthrowing another power faction, right?
described the society of December the 10th that Bonaparte deployed in these terms, and this is Marx. On the pretext of founding a benevolent society, the lumpen proletariat of Paris had been organised into secret sections, each section led by Bonapartist agents, with a Bonapartist general at the head of the whole. Alongside decayed ruse and dubious means of subsistence and of dubious origin, alongside ruined and adventurous offshoots of the bourgeoisie, were vagabonds, discharged soldiers, discharged jailbirds, escaped galley slaves, swindlers, mountebanks, lazzaroni, pickpockets, tricksters, gamblers, marcaroo, brothel keepers, porters, literati, organ grinders, rag pickers, knife grinders, tinkers, beggars. In short, the whole indefinite, disintegrated mass thrown hither and thither, which the French call le bohème. From this kindred element, Bonaparte formed the core of the society of December 10th.
So men without status, basically, people without status. So they're going to go, oh look, you're not happy with your current place in society, we can change things for you, join us, right? They've got nothing to lose. I don't blame them, right?
In other words, according to Marx, this lumpen proletariat, this gang, this counter gang of Bonaparte's was just a pile of scumbags, right?
So they're scumbags because they're less fortunate. Okay, I got ya.
The scum, the underclass scum, much like the ranks of BLM and Antifa that we saw 5 years.
So BLM and Antifa are going to be feminist captured, and it's going to be lots of women who are not underclass. Women are not underclass, right? And it's going to be lots of bourgeoisie, middle class women and upper middle class women LARPing as revolutionaries and dominating these groups. These are feminist captured groups. It's not the same dynamics as the December 10th groups, right? It's a completely different dynamic here, in my opinion. Okay, politics has always been female centered, in my opinion, but it's far more female dominated now because feminists got cultural, legal, social homogeny over the culture. They're hegemony, right? Hegemony, yeah, they're the hegemons of the culture. So Black Lives Matter and Antifa are feminist dominated, especially Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is totally feminist. It's black lesbian feminist.
Years ago,
the privileged group that's not affected by police brutality control the narrative about police brutality. The group that phones the police on black men the most, black women, right, are in charge of Black Lives Matter. The women of Black Lives Matter sick the police on black men in domestic disputes and get them jailed and even killed all the time. Yeah, it's absurd that they're ahead of this group. And the thing is, Black Lives Matter acts as counter gangs because they tackle the subject in a very clumsy, very stupid way. On Black Lives Matter, of the three major Black Lives Matter cases, only one of them they're correct on, the other two they're completely wrong on, right? And it made them look ridiculous that they just backed the people, the black male victim, the black men in those cases without looking at the context of it. Oh, the black men, let's just back them no matter what, and just say irrational, irrelevant shit about them and just lie about the case, right? So it undermined the case of police brutality. There's countless cases of black male police brutality that were far better showcases of the cause than one they kicked, like Trayvon Martin and Alexander Brown, not Alexander Brown, Alexander, Michael Brown. Something. There was this big black bully thug who was in a shotgun on a rampage attacking people. He was attacking an Indian man, right? And he was shot by the police, right? Michael Brown, I can't remember his name. Another one was Trayvon Martin, who was a thug who attacked a half white, half Latino man, and that was pounding his face on the concrete, and he got shot. And Black Lives Matter just backed those cases and lied about them irrationally. So it undermined their own cause by acting irrationally. So that could have been coordinated. It could not have been. Maybe it wasn't coordinated, but it had the same result. It undermined the cause, made it look ridiculous to the average person. Yeah, it made it look like, oh, these are just a bunch of anti-white, racist whiners who back black people no matter what. And you should never have an in-group preference where you back a group no matter what, right? I don't even do that for men, right? If there's a man who's blatantly 100% wrong and you can prove that he's wrong and he's arguing against a female, right? I'm not going to back him, right? Or if there's a man whose actions are completely unjustifiable, right, and it's against a woman and you can prove it 100%, I'm not going to back the man. I don't have this weird in-group bias that a lot of these irrational people have. That's a sign of irrationality, right? I will back the man most of the time because systematically men are disadvantaged, right? And men do not have privilege to get away with stuff like women do, yeah?
And much like other counter gangs that we can think of in recent history, what was the purpose of BLM and Antifa? Well, according to Maupin, it was to prevent the left being a genuinely revolutionary force.
Feminism does that as well, very, very effectively. Like there's anti-left issues that get linked to the left, like abortion. Abortion is actually right-wing eugenics. It's female supremacy and it's eugenics, right? Okay. Abortion is actually far right. It's absurd that we don't call it far right. Right? It's female supremacy. It's eugenics. It's I gatekeep life. I get to decide whether the fetus, the viable life within me, lives or dies. And then women go off and throw abortion parties afterwards. Yeah. Okay. And we've got like late-term abortion, where the fetus is completely viable, is now decriminalised in the UK. Right. Okay. So it's no different than murder, but it's not murder because it's illegal killing. Right. And they tried pushing a law that women could decriminalise killing of the newborn baby for 7 days, which is boundary pushing, right? That's female supremacy as well. There's no call for it. It's just female supremacy. It's absolutely insane. But there's all other sorts of things that get linked to the left due to feminism, yeah? Like misandry, just blatant misandry, like double standards, anti-egalitarian laws that get placed against men, a two-tiered legal system, right? You even have women against violence courts in Spain. Yeah, all sorts of absurd, unethical, evil shit. Yeah, gender apartheid shit. Yeah, two-tiered education system, two-tiered legal system. Yeah, two-tiered schooling. Yeah.
To get the black nationalists off the Malcolm X track and onto this kind of nonsense diversity, whatever it was that BLM actually woke or whatever.
It's not. It's intersectional feminism. Until you understand that, your analysis is also always going to be off the mark, academic agent. It's intersectional feminism. Feminism is one of the most promoted political ideologies to ever exist. Feminism is state power. Feminism is NATO. right? Feminism is the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, the Labour Party, the Conservative Party. Feminism is the hegemon. It's the cultural, political hegemon in the West, yeah, and in many Eastern countries as well, right? Okay, it's not a coincidence that Shielded Men's done videos about this. He's proven links between imperialism and NATO and feminism. The links are proven.
Basically serving the interests of the entrenched ruling class, foot soldiers for the regime.
And the entrenched ruling class serve the interests of feminism.
As I outlined 5 years ago, the videos are there. My video was called The True Meaning of BLM as a Counter-Revolutionary Force. I stand by that analysis. I think it's stood up very well. But I was just fascinated to come across this material.
So the men's rights movement, most of the men's rights movement is a counter-revolutionary force as well. It serves the interests of feminism. Yeah?
Let me carry on reading from Marx. Marx speaks with contempt of this mob, not as a group of wealth creators, but as a group of leeches on French society.
So Marxism is actually obsessed about moral superiority. The unproductive versus the productive, the leeches versus the non-leech, right? Okay? Which is very judgmental. But here's the thing, they don't hold females to the same standard. They never have. Women are the gender bourgeoisie. Women leech off male productivity, right? And look, I can forgive them if they're just like benign, harmless leeches, but I can't because they're hostile. They leech off men, and they build superstructures, right? They create a base and they create a superstructure that's hostile against men, to use Marxist terms, right? They'll create a hostile society, institutions, mechanisms, job markets, education system that's hostile against men and boys, and then they'll create a culture that's hostile against men and boys, yeah? And they don't need to, because men would gladly hand over their resources to women voluntarily. So this is just done out of sadism and spite. It's not even rational. It's not even rational in a Machiavellian sense, like, oh, we're going to be ruthless, we're going to take what we want, we're going to exploit you, right? It's just done out of sadism. It's power for the sake of power. Feminism is actually not a rational political movement.
Benevolent society, insofar as, like Bonaparte, all its members felt the need of benefiting themselves at the expense of the labouring nation. This Bonaparte, who constitutes himself chief of the lumpen proletariat, and it's important to understand this term, lumpen proletariat, because
it just means underclass scum. So, when a woman marries a man, the man panders to her and hands his stuff over to him. That's an exploitative relationship. It's taking advantage of a male emotional weakness and natural male submissiveness to females. And then she gets divorced, and then she uses the state and commits structural violence against the man, alimony, parental alienation, child support, slavery, yeah? Okay? And then she lives in a society where she gets more from the state, more from welfare, more funding from the state, and men pay more into it, yeah? Women are the gender bourgeoisie.
Marx distinguished between people who did productive work, productive labourers, and unproductive scum, basically.
So, what unproductive scum, quote unquote unproductive scum, can actually get very high status, right? Like, you can be a swindler and a con artist and a hustler, right? You can run scams online and you can get a lot of status, you get a lot of money, and you can get lots of pussy, right? You can get selected by women, right? Female selection criteria is not based on productive and unproductive or good versus not good, right? Moral versus immoral, right? Women don't care about that. That's not how their selection criteria works. But Marxists don't care about this, obviously, because they're inconsistent in analysis. They're fundamentally inconsistent and even schizophrenic in their worldview.
You know, ponces, chancers, thieves. These people are not actually truly part of the workers' solidarity. they're kind of on the fringes.
Like soldiers are not part of workers' solidarity, right? They join the army and they get a trad wife and they go abroad and they take part in the imperialism that kills millions. Or police thugs, the state enforcers, the police thugs, they get selected by women, right? They're not productive for the most part. Like you need a legal system. You need laws enforced by violence, to be quite frankly, because there are some really bad people that prey upon people. So it's a necessary evil. But what the police doesn't involve that. It's domestic violence policing, going after young vulnerable people, mentally ill people, over policing disadvantaged communities, right? Okay. Yeah.
But it's interesting that they have this category in their
Disadvantaged communities, disadvantaged male communities are over policed.
analysis, and I think it's important for us to think about as well. Anyway, he says, who here alone rediscovers in mass form the interests which he personally pursues, who recognises in this scum, in this offal, refuse of all classes, this is Marx.
So these people, this underclass scum, grew up in a bad life situation with no welfare state, absolute fucking poverty. A lot of these people are behaving like they do because they don't know any different, right? Calling them scum is a nasty thing to do. It's very judgmental of Marx.
The only class upon which he can base himself unconditionally is the real Bonaparte, the Bonaparte sans phrase. What the national ateliers were for the social workers, what the Garde Mobile were for the bourgeois republicans, the Society of December 10th was for Bonaparte, the party fighting force peculiar to him. The Society of December 10th was to remain the private army of Bonaparte until he succeeded in transforming the public army into a Society of December 10th. Unlike the
underclass men don't really form public armies anymore. Underclass men just tend to be online and act like weirdos, like join the incel community or join right-wing groups or maybe join some left-wing groups, or they join incel tiers. There's lots of like underclass, low-status men in the incel tiers, for example. They just join weird online factions. They just act dysfunctional and they don't think on a holistic macro level, right? They're obsessed with petty squabbles and drama and stalking and harassing other low-status men, right?
labour unions and socialist groups with deep roots in the communities. The Society of December 10th was a collection of thugs, criminals, and elements from the margins of society. Rather than empowering millions of French people to awaken and enter politics to improve their conditions, Louis Bonaparte had simply created a gang of marginal elements to function as a hit squad and pave the way for his regime to seize power.
So these feminist groups invade progressive movements and important spaces and destroy them. But it's not just feminists who do this. Let's talk about decentralised counter gangs again. So conspiracy theorists are the same as well. So a group will either get invaded by feminists or it get invaded by conspiracy theorists, and it will start talking about wacky shit and deranged ramblings that will put people off them, right? They'll just talk about elites, they'll talk about Epstein, they'll talk about pedos, they'll use coded anti-Semitism, right? And that means it will just undermine the movement. Once you have weirdos in a movement, it'll just create general dysfunction. And there probably is conspiracy theory groups funded by the state to a certain regard, or encouraged, right, or not cracked down upon. Because an oppressed person, instead of channeling his anger into something, thinking about things systematically and organising, it'll just be off in the conspiracy forums rambling on about the elites all the time, or just what the latest conspiracy theory is. Fix this Epstein Island. All this energy is wasted on Epstein Island by the mental defects, right?
The contempt with which, and this is...
It serves state power. The derailment and the misdirection of energy serves state power. It serves the status quo. conspiracy theory is the status quo. Yeah. Why do you think a JFK movie was made? Because it's not a threat to the system. Yeah.
Mopin talking now. Marx described
Like Alex Jones. Alex Jones was on mainstream TV. Were Marxists on mainstream TV? No.
Louis Bonaparte's September, a society of December the 10th, is hardly concealed in his words. Marx wanted a broad mass movement of ordinary workers to become politically aware and work in their economic interest. Louis Bonaparte, like many demagogues who emerged during capitalist crises as the rich fight amongst themselves, wanted an isolated group of violent fanatics and unstable semi-criminals with which to create chaos and pave the way for his own seizure of power. Since 1852, when Marx laid out this understanding, the Marxist movement's perspective on this issue has evolved and adjusted.
So the Marxists have let themselves be taken over by feminist counter gangs.
The tendency of Bonapartist figures to build...
And the ones who are not feminists, they're just mentally ill, sadistic, hostile right-wingers, right? Who are low IQ and stupid.
Up political groups of fanatics to do their bidding, as Louis Bonaparte did with the Society of December 10th, is pretty consistent. Woodrow Wilson revived and built up the Ku Klux Klan to serve this purpose. The Italian fascist black shirts, the Nazi stormtroopers, all more or less served this function. However, when...
So Putin does the same thing as well. He's got his own counter gangs. He's got his own right-wing groups that are controlled by the state, because it's better to control them than to have like organic grassroots ones that are out of control and unpredictable. Yeah, this happens a lot. You make your own versions of these groups, grassroots groups, and you infiltrate them and you domesticate them, right? So they're more amenable and controllable.
One digs deeper, one can see that there is a huge amount of overlap between revolutionary organisations and Bonapartist gangs, and the role such organisations play at any time can change. What constitutes a genuinely revolutionary working class movement? What constitutes a lumpen mob serving one section of the bourgeoisie, as one looks over the history of the Marxist movement and political turmoil throughout the world? From Marx's day right up into the 21st century, it becomes clear that this differentiation has become completely muddled. And
the muddling serves interests of state power, and it serves feminists as well. Intersectional feminism is a political tactic of that muddling. Like, hijack queer issues, hijack racial minority issues or ethnic minority issues, hijack other issues, other progressive issues, pretend they're about feminism, muddy and confuse the issue, right? It is perfect for the feminist system.
Successful revolutionary movements and organisations often play multiple roles over the course of their development. The more important question, obviously, is what kind of revolutionary movement is needed in our time? Finding the answer...
A pro-male revolutionary movement's needed. We need pro-male movements.
...requires us to dig through lots of complex and often obscured history. And I'll stop it there.
Right, I'm going to stop it there as well. Okay, I think I've said all I had to say on this subject. Yeah, so let's call it a day. So yeah. Oh yeah, maybe I should have a post-amble, like a conclusion. So, conspiracy theorists and intersectionalists and feminists have to be kept out of any serious political movement. If you don't, you'll get submerged, and things will get muddied, things will get confused, and you'll get derailed, and then you'll get defeated, basically. So there's a reason why all these red pill people and all these like conspiracy nuts and all these misinterest feminists are tolerated by the system, by the internet, by the algorithm, because they're not a threat to the system. They actually undermine it. They want men channeled to incel forums ranting nonsense. They want men channeled to the red pill, or so they're ranting on about blue pills and red pill people, right? They want men channeled into male feminism, yeah. They don't want men channeled being into pro male though. I'll tell you that much. Okay.